Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. All right, for the sake of everyone's time, I am going to get started. My name is Dr. Jaclyn Siano. I am a director here at Inspired Instruction, and welcome to our monthly webinar. Our topic this month is Mastering the Art of Integrating the updated NJSLS for ELA and NJSLS for Math across the curriculum. So just to kind of give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about, we're going to start off by talking about why we have to do interdisciplinary connections and the requirements by the state. Then we'll talk mostly about ELA integration because it is required for all content area. We'll touch a little bit on ways to integrate math into different curricular areas. And then I'm going to share some additional resources. And everyone who joins today, or if you watch the recording, you will have access to a resource sheet that will be shared with you via email. And if you want to watch this again, this will be available on our website by tomorrow afternoon. So again, thank you all for joining, and let's get started. All right, so why do we have to integrate other standards into the curriculum? Let's talk about the basics. So both CUSAC and the state of New Jersey both require interdisciplinary connections in our curriculum. So that means every single content area, whether it's ELA, math, social studies, visual performing arts, all of the above, you have to have evidence of at least one interdisciplinary connection across grades and content areas. And that is not inclusive of our 21st century skills, our computer science and design thinking. And that's not inclusive of ELA because everybody has to have ELA interdisciplinary standards as well, which is really why I'm going to spend a big chunk of our time today talking about ELA integration. So K through 12, all content areas are required to have interdisciplinary connections in the curriculum. And that doesn't only mean including standards, that also means that there are instructional strategies and resources to support that. So a couple of things. If you are an ELA curriculum writer, or if you're in charge of, ELA curriculum, that means when you write your grades K to 12 ELA curriculum, you do have to have interdisciplinary standards and connections to at least one other content area. So that could be social studies, that could be math, science, phys ed health, visual performing arts, world languages, whatever you would like it to be. ELA curriculum does require interdisciplinary connection to one other content area. Now, for all other content areas, including math, you have to have ELA interdisciplinary connections as well as one other content area. So that means if I'm writing a math curriculum, I have to have interdisciplinary standards for both ELA and one other thing. So that could be science, that could be social studies, that could be VPA, but we do have to have both. So obviously ELA curriculum is excluded from that because you already have those as the content standards. But if I'm revising or writing an ELA curriculum, I do have to have at least one other content area. A lot of times it's social studies, but you can choose anything that you want as long as you have something else. So what does that mean as we are all, I know I'm working with lots of schools right now, we are all revising the curriculum especially for ELA and math because of the new standards. So what does that actually mean as we're moving forward? Because the state does require that these new 2023 math and ELA standards are integrated into curricula for September. So that means if you are revising an ELA curriculum, you have to keep in mind that all of the ELA and NJSLS need to be updated to the 2023 standards. If you are revising math curriculum, that means all of your math standards have to be updated to 2023. And if you don't have interdisciplinary ELA and NJSLS, you have to add them. If you do already have them, those need to be updated to 2023. And then all other content areas. And I think as I'm working with schools, this is the biggest thing that comes up that people don't necessarily realize has to be done. Your science curriculum, your social studies curriculum, they need to have interdisciplinary ELA standards. A lot of you probably already have them. They have to be updated to 2023 as well. So that means going into your social studies curriculum, going to the interdisciplinary section and making sure those ELA standards are updated to 2023. And the big point of that, especially at the secondary level, is because the companion standards have been removed, we are going to have to take a deep dive into that and look at, okay, what do I need to sub into my interdisciplinary for ELA that maybe don't exist anymore. And then if you have science courses, you might have interdisciplinary math standards. Those have to be updated as well. So just it's important to keep in mind that if you are in the middle of this curriculum revision process, like I am with so many schools, yes, ELA and math have to be revised, but you do have to look at your other content areas as well to make sure those interdisciplinary standards are updated. All right, so I'm going to spend a bulk of the time today talking about how to integrate ELA across the curriculum, so across multiple content areas. And the reason the bulk of the time is going to be on ELA is, as I mentioned, every single content area has to have ELA standards integrated. From social studies to science to math to visual performing arts, world languages, everybody across the board. So we want to talk about how we can effectively integrate those standards into our curricular guides, and more importantly, into instruction, because it's not enough just to throw a standard in there. We have to make sure there's activities or instructional strategies that support those ELA standards. So that's what I want to help out with today. So as I mentioned previously, the most important change at the secondary level for other content areas is that there are no more companion standards. So if you're revising a social studies or a science curriculum, those RST and RH standards that you probably had in for your interdisciplinary section, they have to be removed because they no longer exist. So that is a big shift. And then in regards to other things, we also have from K to 5, we have the foundational skills, reading and writing. We have coding changes across the board for ELA. So some of the verbiage stays the same. Most of it is very different for ELA. So there's no really way to get around changing out those ELA standards in your interdisciplinary section. So obviously, if you're revising an ELA curriculum, you know you have to update the ELA standards. But for everybody else, you're going to have to as well because they got to be in there. So all content areas should be familiar with the ELA standards. So even if you're like, oh, I'm a science supervisor, I don't need to know ELA standards. You got to know a little bit because you got to put them in. So for across the curriculum, reading informational text, language, writing, and speaking and listening are probably going to be the 4 subsections that you pull from when it comes to interdisciplinary connections. So I'm going to provide you with some easy strategies and connected standards on how you can integrate these into your curricular guides for different content areas. So with incorporating reading informational text, so we know that, like I said, the coding has all been changed for the ELA standards. CR now stands for close reading of text. So across the board, the goal is by the end of grade 12, students are able to read closely, figure out what a text says explicitly, make inferences, make connections, cite textual evidence, and support conclusions. The good thing is almost every content area, you can incorporate informational text. It could be an article, it could be a biography. There's lots of different things we can do across the content areas to incorporate informational text. So every single grade has a CR standard for reading informational text. So I added a couple here just so you can kind of see how they run the gamut. But for the most part, if you are reading an informational text in your course, you should be able to integrate the RICR standard, which is reading informational text close reading. So you can see, starting at kindergarten, we want them reading informational text and just basically asking questions like the who, what, where, when, why, how. And then as we get through the grade levels, we're asking them to do a little bit more, make connections in 3rd grade. In 6th grade, cite textual evidence. By high school, we want them to make relevant connections with analysis. So how do we do this? So we can't just throw the RICR standard into our science curriculum unless there's something to support it. So one of the things that I found really, really effective, it works in every content area, is have students annotate a text. You're reading in every content area. So you might be reading a biography of an artist in your art class, or you might be reading a current event in your social studies class. You can have them annotate a text in a couple of different ways, and this will cover your RI standard for close reading, which means you can put that into your curriculum guide for an interdisciplinary standard. So annotation is definitely a skill that students need to learn. You can't just hand them a text and say, here, go annotate this. It doesn't always work very well. So, this is stuff like, as you're reading, bracket important information, draw lines to connect different ideas that are related, underline the most important details, write comments and questions, use stars, circle words you don't know. So close reading, making them really read instead of just saying, yep, I read this, giving them actual directions on what to do. So we can provide anchor charts or handouts. We can offer exemplars of annotated texts. We can model how to annotate and then provide feedback. And this is something that students can do independently, where here, I want you to read this article for homework, and these are the annotations I want you to make. And you can choose, depending on your grade level, you might give them 2 things to do in first grade and 6 things to do in 7th grade. It's really up to you and the level of your students. But annotating a text independently is one way that we can cover that reading informational text CR standard. We could also have students annotate in small groups. And this is one of my favorite activities that I'm going to share, and you will get a copy of this in your resources after the webinar, the annotation stations activity. I've seen this work in science classrooms. I've seen this work in social studies classrooms, art classrooms. Same concept of teaching the students how to close read and annotate, but they're circling through different activity centers. So station 1, and everyone's working with the same text. So let's say we give them that current event and everyone's working with the same text. They're going to move with their group to each of these 4 stations. So their group's going to get to station 1. Highlight any word or phrase that you're unfamiliar with. Then as a group, kind of think about what do you think it might mean, look for context clues, look it up in the dictionary, add the definition to the margin of your text so that you have it for future reference. This also covers a language standard, which is great too, which is the vocabulary acquisition. When I write curriculum or revise curriculum for schools, I really try to double dip as much as I can. If there's one activity like this that can cover multiple standards, then that's more standards I can put in the interdisciplinary section. So I find that really helpful. So station 1 is the vocabulary section. Read the article, highlight any word or phrase, think about what it means, look it up. Station 2, then the group moves. So you might want to set a timer for 6 minutes and then everyone moves to the next station. That's the central idea station. Draw a rectangle around what you believe is the author's central idea, and then underline any important details that support this idea. With your group, figure out, okay, what is the central idea? Because, if you give 4 kids this activity, they might come up with 4 different answers. Find the paragraph number. So we're also doing citations of where you found supporting details. And this one also covers another reading informational text standard, CI, which is central ideas and themes of a text. And then they move to station 3, which is the structure section. You give them a paragraph, reread paragraph 4. Think about how paragraph 4 helps contribute to your understanding of the text as a whole or the central idea of a text. With your group, decide what your answer is, add it to a piece of chart paper, use specific details. And this one, again, double dips and covers a text structure, reading informational text standard. And then finally, station 4 is the point of view station. So you're looking at what's the author's point of view, what reasons do they provide, draw an arrow next to any evidence that demonstrates the author's point of view. With your group, figure out the 3 best pieces of evidence that support the author's point of view. And again, covers another standard, which is reading informational text, perspectives, and purposes in text. So like I said, you're going to get a copy of this, but basically the concept is you're working off of one text as a whole group, but in small groups, they're going to different stations and doing an activity at each focused on close reading of that same text, but through different lenses. So all 4 of these stations cover our close reading standard, but each one also covers another standard. So if you were to do this activity in your science class, your art class, your phys ed class, whatever it happens to be, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different standards for interdisciplinary ELA you can include in your curriculum just by doing this one activity. And I find that really helpful. And this is also something that you can do over and over again with multiple texts across, the course of the year. And it provides them with really helpful skills that they can also use on the NJSLA, anywhere else that they need to be able to, determine how to determine unknown words for vocabulary, determine the central idea, understand the structure of a piece of writing, and understand point of view and perspective of that piece of writing. So really an awesome activity that incorporates all different standards for ELA. Vocabulary is another section that's really helpful for cross-curricular because every single content area is going to have different vocabulary for that content area, right? So for social studies, you're going to have a vocab list just like you are for science. So being able to integrate that vocabulary into your curriculum, you can also cover some interdisciplinary ELA standards that way. So the one I'm going to focus on is the language standard with the coding VL, which stands for vocabulary acquisition, use, and literal meaning, which basically means by the end of grade 12, they should be able to figure out how do I determine the meaning of an unknown word or a word with multiple meanings by analyzing the word parts, using different strategies, and consulting dictionaries. So that's why I said before with that stations activity, this was one of the standards that was covered because it asked them to use a dictionary to look up unknown words. So everywhere from K to 12, this is a standard, but it definitely looks different in each grade. So in the purple, you have what this standard looks like in grade 2. And in the green, you have what it looks like in grade 8. So you'll see it says, determine or clarify the meaning of unknown and multiple meaning words or phrases. That's the same. But then what we specifically want them to do varies by grade level. So that's why it is really important, as I mentioned before, that even if you are not an ELA person, you definitely want to familiarize yourself with the ELA standards, just so you know the expectations. So in terms of teaching vocabulary, and we can be and should be teaching vocabulary across the content areas. Just 4 very effective, simple strategies. And then if you're doing these things, then the vocabulary language standards are ones that you can include in your interdisciplinary section of your curriculum. Make sure we're providing student-friendly definitions. We're using the words in context. We're providing multiple means of exposure. And we're offering opportunities for active involvement. So one of my favorite vocabulary strategies that works across the content areas is the Freyer model. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before. It's really simple. I'm a big fan of graphic organizers since I was an ELA teacher for so long. It's basically just 4 boxes with the word in the middle. So if this is an example of a math one. So if the vocab word is less than, in the one box, what does it mean in your own words? Next box, what are the characteristics? Examples and non-examples. And you can modify this to fit your needs for any content area. And if you want to, you can modify what you want the students to put in the boxes. So when I did it in an ELA class, it was definition, I did synonyms, I did antonyms, and write a sentence using the word. So you can vary it however you want. And depending on how you vary it, you can also cover additional standards. So for example, if you put in synonym and antonym boxes, you would also cover the language standard for vocabulary acquisition, use, and interpretive meaning. So there's lots of ways to incorporate these standards. So just because you're a science person or a social studies person or a phys ed person, all it takes is 1 or 2 activities like this to be able to integrate those ELA standards. And you will get a copy of the Freyer model template in the resource sheet after the webinar so that you can share with your teachers or use in your own curriculum guides. You can hyperlink it as, hey, here's a great activity and it covers this standard. Because remember, as we're revising curriculum, the biggest key is you can't just throw standards in there. There's got to be some kind of resource or instructional strategy to support them. So this would be a great one if you did want to include one of the language vocabulary standards into your curriculum guide. All right, speaking and listening. So speaking and listening is a really easy one to integrate because I would say across the board, all grade levels, all content areas are always doing something in regards to participation. And the easiest one to integrate, in my opinion, is the PE, which is participate effectively. So that means students are participating in collaborations. It could be small group, it could be whole group, it could be partners, just being able to express their own ideas clearly and persuasively. And I would say, again, across the board, that's easy to include as an interdisciplinary standard, because if they're having any kind of discussion, there you go, speaking and listening standards. So from K to 12, they are incorporated for participate effectively. They look similar in terms of, we're participating in collaborative conversations, but then obviously the substandards, the specific descriptors, get more advanced as the grades progress. So in kindergarten, it's really more about they're following norms for discussions and continuing a conversation. By the time they get to high school, we want them to come to discussions prepared, collaborate with peers and set rules, keep the conversation going, being able to respond to disagreement. But either way, whether it's kindergarten, high school, in your classes, if students are involved in any kind of collaborative conversation, you can absolutely incorporate the SL-PE standard based on your grade. An easy activity to do this, so if I'm thinking as a curriculum writer, I want to include the SL-PE standard, but I need something in there to support it. The Me+3 activity is really great, and it works in all grade levels, K to 12. And you can kind of modify your expectations based on the grade level. So it's this template where the top part says me, you have a 1, 2, 3, and then you have a me again. So it starts off by the teacher poses a question or a prompt. So whatever content related topic you are discussing, what are your views on blank? That could be the starter. The student writes down their answer in that top me box. Then the student talks to 3 peers. So peer 1 jots down their ideas, uses the peer's vocabulary and evidence, and that would go in box 1. Talks to the second peer, repeats the process, talks to the third peer, repeats the process. So it's really formulaic guided conversation. Then the student revises his or her own answer to incorporate the things that they've learned from their peers. So it's really helping them to see other people's perspectives, get evidence that they may not have thought of, and then revise their own answer. So hopefully gaining new information to revise what they originally thought. And then this can become, that final me box can become a conversation starter for a larger group conversation. So that would be a really easy activity and a resource to include in your curriculum guide for any content area, and then be able to incorporate the SL standard for interdisciplinary. And you will get a copy of this template as well, so feel free to use it and link it into your curriculum guides. Now, there's some things that do even more than double duty. So as much as I love, one activity, multiple standards, for vocabulary and language, or covers multiple standards in speaking and listening, there are some activities that cover multiple domains. So reading, speaking and listening, and language all at the same time, yes, please. Think Alouds. Think Alouds cover all 3 of those, and if you wanted to really get fancy, it could even incorporate writing. So the Think Aloud technique is basically, how do we read proficiently, and then being able to comprehend what we're reading. So if we think about the reading informational text, every content area is reading informational text. If I use a Think Aloud technique, as the teacher, I'm reading a portion of the text, and then I'm pausing, well, this part makes me think blank. Or this word, I'm not really sure what it means. You're thinking aloud. So if you were to have students do this, you obviously need to teach the process, but it's a really great process to kind of support that metacognition. But it incorporates reading, because the students are reading, they're listening to you read, which is the speaking and listening piece. And then we're modeling it. You could show them how to annotate this way. And then you could ask them to do it independently. Say, okay, I want you to do Think Aloud with your partner, focus on vocabulary that you don't know. Okay, and now I'm incorporating language standards. If you really want to get fancy, you can even have them do some kind of written reflection on the Think Aloud that they did for this text. And then you've incorporated reading, speaking and listening, language, and writing all in one activity. And you can put all 4 of those standards into your curriculum guide. So again, I'm all about most bang for your buck when it comes to curriculum. So this is a really cool one. And it's a strategy that you can use over and over again with multiple texts and across the content areas, because you can use it for anything that you're reading in your class. So it does, if you're reading out of a textbook or you're reading, part of a story with your students, whatever it happens to be, this works across the board. You can link it in your curriculum guide, and then you can also incorporate those interdisciplinary ELA standards. And lastly, writing. I think for the most part, the majority of courses, K-12, all content areas, incorporate some kind of writing. You do not have to incorporate a research paper in every course in order to integrate ELA standards into your curriculum. The RW standard for writing, it stands for range of writing. Basically means that students are doing some kind of writing, whether it's longer, shorter, range of tasks, range of purposes, range of audiences over the course of your class. So everywhere from K-12 has this standard. So at the younger grades, it's really engaging in collaborative and independent writing tasks regularly. That could be a journal. That could be a do now. It doesn't have to be a book report. It can be something short. In grade 5, writing routinely over extended time frames for a range of task purposes and audiences. For the higher grades, this is where those companion standards that no longer exist, the verbiage from those have kind of been pulled into other standards. So you'll see, like for 7th grade, discipline specific tasks. So it might be, writing a lab report for science. Or it might be writing a reflection for a portfolio in music or art class. So the 0.7 standards in writing are great implementation for interdisciplinary standards, and really can be included in any content area curriculum guide, as long as you have some kind of activity or strategy to support it, like journal writing, like do nows. One of my favorite and easiest way, daily writing with pictures. All kids love pictures. I love pictures. I'm a very visual human being, and it works for all content areas. I used to have a do now page for my students, where it was literally a piece of paper. It had 5 boxes: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Each day they had some kind of a writing prompt or a do now or something that they had to respond to. On Fridays, they handed it in and they got a grade on it. So this was one of the things that I very often did, was put up a photograph. Like if we were learning about the Salem witch trials, I would put up a photograph that somehow related to it, ask them to respond in a free write format. If you are using like a word wall for vocabulary, encourage them to use academic vocabulary in their responses, and you can use it for any content area. Easy way to incorporate that writing RW standard into your curriculum, again, as long as you include that this is the strategy that you're using. And you can use any photograph, any picture, a piece of art, a drawing, a diagram, a map, whatever you happen to be learning or teaching in that content area. All right, so that is hopefully a whole bunch of helpful ways to integrate ELA into different content areas. And again, that's for my math people, my science people, my social studies people, my visual performing arts people, my phys ed health people. Hopefully easy, generic ways to integrate those ELA standards. Now, math is a little bit of a different animal, but we are going to spend some time on it. Keep in mind that unlike ELA, math standards are not required as interdisciplinary in all content areas. So if I'm doing an ELA curriculum, I do not have to have math as an interdisciplinary standard. There might be one that fits something I'm doing, but it's not required like ELA is. For the most part, science courses are the ones that wind up integrating the math standards. And one of the big reasons for that is when you look at the science standards, they have on the bottom the specific math standards that connect to each one, which is really helpful. But for my science people, keep in mind that the science standards, even though they have those math standards on the bottom, they haven't been updated to the 2023. So you just have to be mindful of that. When you review your science curriculum, make sure the math standards that you have in your curriculum guide are up to date. You might decide that you want to integrate a math standard in your visual performing arts class. You know, with art, you might have some stuff that connects. Phys ed and health, you might have some math standards that connect. So not required, but I do want to give you some strategies. If you want to incorporate math as an interdisciplinary, how do we do that? So with the new standards for math, there's not as many revisions for math as there are for ELA, but data literacy is a big push and a change with the new math standards. And we know that there's data in every curricular area that can be pulled from, and we can use as a teaching tool. So with the data literacy push, the idea was we want students to really understand that they can make sense of the world through data and understanding it. So that would be, you know, formulating statistical questions, collecting and analyzing data, coming up with research questions, communicating findings. So across the content areas, there's a lot of different ways you can use data and then be able to integrate those math standards. So if I'm looking at the K-5 realm, in social studies, different types of data I could use, migration patterns. In science, we can use experiment data. Physical education, we can use exercises, how many and how long does it take to do certain things. In world languages like Spanish, you can do populations of Spanish-speaking countries. So there's lots of different data sets you could pull from. And then if you wanted to, you could use the DL standards, which are the data literacy standards that are newer to the math NJSLS. And they kind of run the gamut. For the most part, you know, again, they get from, you know, easier to harder based on the grade level. You know, in kindergarten, it's classifying objects into categories. So it might be, you know, looking at a map and counting, you know, how many countries are here, how many, you know, how many continents are there, different things like that. In grade 1, organizing, representing, and interpreting data, asking and answering questions about the data, how many in each, more or less, that kind of stuff. And then if we go to grade 2, understanding that people collect data to answer questions and that data can vary. Grade 3, student-centered data. So for grade 3, it's real easy, right? Because pick your content area and have them collect data on whatever you're learning about. So if you happen to be learning about, I don't know, let's take phys ed for an example. Who likes soccer more than baseball or vice versa? And they can do a poll and collect their data. Grade 4, creating their own questions and generating ideas on the questions. Grade 5, developing strategies to collect data and then being able to communicate it. You can have them put together a PowerPoint presentation on whatever topic you're covering. So there definitely are ways to integrate those math standards into the different content areas. It's just up to you if you want to do it or not, or if it fits. I'm a big believer of not forcing in interdisciplinary standards where they don't fit, because then it becomes disingenuous, and we don't want curriculum that's not usable. In my opinion, a curriculum guide should be a usable document for teachers. And if we're throwing things in there just to check off a box, then it's not really helpful. So we want to make sure that if we are going to include math in the different content areas, that it makes sense to include it and that we're including strategies and activities to support them. And then climate change. We know that every single content area has to incorporate climate change right now. As of September, math and ELA have it too. So math, if you haven't seen it yet, and I'll show you where to find it in a few minutes, math and ELA both have climate change documents that show you the climate change standards for the content area for each grade and give you examples of how to integrate them. So for example, in high school, one of the climate change standards for math is applying concepts of density based on area and volume, modeling different things. And then you'll see that climate change example. Those are the things that are on this this climate change document. So they are really helpful. So these are some secondary examples of math standards that could be integrated into other content areas using climate change as the bridge. So if we look at that geometry example in yellow in the middle, it says, in order to cover this standard, one way you could cover this standard, students may apply the concept of population density of different urban areas, including calculations of population density, and then discuss different environmental factors that might be exacerbated by increased population density. So if that's something that you're already covering in your social studies class, then this might be a good fit for a math interdisciplinary standard. And then I have an 8th grade example in purple and a high school standard in green, both of which would fit really well in a science classroom. So the 8th grade one talks about bivariate measurement data and using linear association, nonlinear association through scatter plots. So you could absolutely have your students, construct a scatter plot for measurement data based on different labs that they're doing. And that would be covered in science. For the high school one in green, representing data, histograms, box plots, dot plots, that would work really well in science, also. So my point with the math is it might not fit. And if it doesn't fit as an interdisciplinary standard, don't force it. However, it is, in my opinion, really helpful to look at those climate change documents provided by the state for math and see, oh, this example, oh, this would fit really well in social studies. This would fit in science. This could fit in health. And if it does fit, absolutely put it in, but make sure it's genuine and that there are activities and strategies to support it. So in terms of data and climate change, the Global Climate Dashboard, it's a link and I will share it with you in the resource page. It provides just a variety of data related to climate that really can be, if you want to do data literacy, if you want to do any of the climate change standards that I mentioned in the previous slide, it's a bunch of data sets. So it is helpful. They're based on topics, so different types of data that you could provide your students and then give them an activity based on the data. But this website as a whole has a lot of really great resources. So there's a whole maps and data section. So as I was playing around in here, there's a lot of maps that really would fit well with social studies, a lot that would fit well with science. There's a couple, even if you're talking about different language speaking countries and world languages that could fit. So definitely a great resource if you're going to be going the data route with the math standards to incorporate them for interdisciplinary. So I did want to share that as a really cool resource. And another thing that some people aren't aware that we have, New Jersey on the website for the standards has sample interdisciplinary connections. And these are really cool, and keep in mind that they have not been updated with the correct codes for ELA and math, but they're still great as guiding, questions and standards to integrate multiple content areas. I know some districts really like having interdisciplinary lessons where you have, like my district required it, that once a marking period, we had to have an interdisciplinary lesson that covered more than one content area. It works for that. It also works for just including interdisciplinary standards in your content area. So there's ones for every grade band, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12. I just pulled a couple of examples, but I like it because it gives you an overarching question, it gives you a rationale, and then it gives you all the different content area standards that could be covered if you did an activity based on this overarching question. So for example, in grade 2, the question they provided was, how can we reduce the impact of climate change on land, water, air, and or other living things in our local environment? So if you as a teacher, as a curriculum writer, created an activity or a writing assignment based on this overarching question, you could cover career readiness, life literacy, key skill standard, science standard, visual performing arts standard, and a math standard all in one shot. And all of those could go in your interdisciplinary section. In grade 6, one of the examples they gave was how can data be used to address issues of climate change and public policy? So depending on what kind of activity you created, you could incorporate social studies standard, multiple math standards, computer science and design thinking standards, career readiness, life literacy, and key skills standards. So there's definitely ways to incorporate, again, more bang for your buck, multiple content areas across the board into your interdisciplinary connections, in addition to just math and ELA. So this is a really cool resource, and I will share that with you in a second. So again, like I said, I'm knee deep in curriculum right now, helping multiple districts, revise their curriculum guides, add resources, align the new standards. So I found a few resources that I wanted to share with you that I found really helpful. The first one is our resource library. If you're looking for ELA and math related activities to integrate because you want to incorporate a certain interdisciplinary standard into your curriculum, we have a ton of free resources. Like a bunch of them are the ones that you're going to get with your resource page that you get after the webinar. But like a triple entry journal is like an easy way to integrate, when you read something, to reflect on it, student comprehension. It's very structured, almost like a side-by-side. So I read this and this is what I thought. Like this could be a really cool thing to link into your curriculum if you wanted to cover a writing standard. So that's my first suggestion, is we do have a ton of free resources on our website for both math, ELA, and every other content area, but it might help you when integrating these standards into your curriculum. The New Jersey sample interdisciplinary connections. So this was the stuff I was just talking about, but I wanted to show you where to find it. So this is on the New Jersey State website. As I said, it's by grade band, and they have the overarching questions, the rationale, and then all the possible performance expectations in different content areas and how they would connect. But keep in mind, if it says ELA or if it says math, those have not been updated to 2023. So if you're going to use them, just make sure you update them. But they have those here, and there's lots of different ones for all the different grade bands. And some of them are really interesting. It would make really cool research projects for students or group projects. And then lastly, just making sure, especially if you're not a math or ELA person, that you know where to access the revised standards and all the resources that come with that. So on the New Jersey Student Learning Center, Student Learning Standards page, if you go, for example, under English Language Arts, you have the revised standards. You have the crosswalk, which shows the difference in coding from the old standards to the new standards. That climate change companion guide that I was talking about is really, really helpful. And then if you go to math, we have the revised standard, the crosswalks. They already put up a high school math course frameworks and content emphasis, their climate change companion guide. So lots of different resources as well, just to familiarize yourself further with the standards. So lots of different resources. All right, so I do hope this was really helpful. I have a couple of what's next steps for you. I am going to put into the chat right now a form. I would love it if you could fill it out. It's just a little, how could we help kind of thing. And hopefully this was helpful, and let me know how I did, because I do think it is really helpful feedback. So if you could please complete the survey, that would be wonderful. I would greatly appreciate it. So over the next few days, you will get an email with a resource sheet. And on that resource sheet will be the annotation stations activity, the Frayer model template, the Me+3 template, the Think Aloud Teaching Strategy guide, and then also all the links that I shared today. So the climate change data, and then those 3 resources I just showed. So you'll have access to all those things. Hopefully they'll help you as you revise your curriculum. And the recording, if you want to watch this again, it will be available on the website in the same place where you registered. It will be available by tomorrow afternoon. And if you need help, as I said, I'm working with multiple districts, and it can look a lot of different ways. It could be your teachers are doing it and we're helping. We could audit, we could flat out just do it for you, whatever you need curriculum wise. Even if you just want to pick my brain, feel free to reach out. I'm curriculum crazy right now, and I do very much enjoy it. So I'm happy to help if you need help. So again, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you spent your afternoon with me, and I do hope this was helpful, and do not hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.